Hey everybody, today I'm going to show how to use a reference drawing to construct an arm using SmartBone technique. And this approach is best when you're really wanting to have more of a realistic movement to the arm, more natural, fluid type of movement. If you want sharper angles at the elbow, or if you want muscles moving as you bend the arm. It does require that you are very familiar with SmartBones and point binding and things like that, so it's not as easy to do for beginners as the rounded joint construction. And it's not good if you want to actually flip the arm across, the forearm going across the upper arm. You can do it, but it's not very easy to do. The other thing is it's not very easy to take that arm and to move it over to another arm and a different character or whatever and change things. You have to completely redo the SmartBones. So in this kind of technique, you just need to be very comfortable with SmartBones in general and just be able to completely wipe out the SmartBone and redo it. But having said that, it's a very nice technique and it's very powerful. Now, we'll do the SmartBone for the elbow in particular. We'll use rounded joints really up here and down at the wrist. You actually don't have to have a rounded joint, but there's some advantages there. And finally, this approach is just kind of more natural for just getting in there and sketching it and just putting things where you want them. Okay, so let's get started. So I assume that you already know about bones and parenting and all this, all those other kind of things. So we've got a skeleton that's partially constructed, and so we're going to parent to the chest bone here. And I'm going to now draw my bones for the upper arm, lower arm, and the hand. And by the way, in this particular character, I do have layers set up for the vector layers set up, and I call the arm on the left side the left arm, even though that's her right arm. Other people have used this as the front arm and the back arm. That's probably a better naming, but that's what I've already named those vector layers. So all we're going to do is going to go ahead and construct those bones. So I'll just start where I think the center of rotation will be, somewhere around here, and end up at the center of rotation of the elbow. And then from there I will draw to the center of rotation of the wrist and then put the hand. Now that this flashing that you see, if you're not familiar with that, if I go to Edit Preferences, Enable GPU, depending upon what I'm doing during the process, I may want to enable GPU or turn it off. And so it's kind of annoying, but you may have to do that. In your computer, it may work fine, but in some computers like mine, your setting for enable GPU will affect what you see on the screen. So I've basically got my arm constructed here. Now one of the advantages of the SmartBone technique is I only need one layer for this entire arm. Of course, for my hand, I'm using switch layers, and so that's separate. But the upper and lower arm I can do together. So in this particular case, I'm actually, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and turn off that Enable GPU or turn it on for right now, so that we don't have that flashing type of thing. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just draw the arm here. I probably will need to change the location here of the bone, so I might want to look at that a little bit. It doesn't really matter much. In fact, I'm going to leave it that way so you can see what you can do with the SmartBone. Now, here I'm going to rotate. As I rotate the shoulder, this is actually a little bit low, and so when I rotate, it will kind of be an elongated point that will move around. So it's kind of a good idea to actually use a reference for this shoulder, and we'll also want a reference for this wrist. So if we want to do that, I have a reference circle layer, and all it has on it is a circle with two lines, a vertical and horizontal line through it, and the stroke is the stroke that's used for the skin or for the arm, whatever I'm using for the arm, whether it's the shirt or whatever. In this case, it happens to be called skin. And so that allows me to easily match up the thickness of the line if I want to do that. So here, I'm going to go ahead and make this one a rounded one. It doesn't have to be. You can do however you want, but just to show how you can do this. So I'm going to select a point transform tool. We've got all the points selected, so I can just move it over here, and I'm going to move it aligned up right to the center. Now, you don't have to be perfect on this. It doesn't really matter, especially since you're using smart bones, because you can change it however you want. But that's what it would look like. And so you can see, well, maybe that's kind of not where I want that to be. And so maybe I also want to make it a little larger, so I'll do Alt and drag it a little bit larger if I want. But I just find wherever I think that shoulder rotation would be good. And so you'll see I was actually quite a bit off in my placement of my bone, I think. But that's an artistic thing you'll have to play around with. But by having that there, now it's easier for me to go into the bone, and I will now drag that to the center. So I want to put it right in the center of that cross there, or that plus. And that then means I probably want to adjust this a little bit. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more and maybe, put that here. And again, I could do the reference circle if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do that here because I'm going to use smart bones to show how we can fix anything. And I'll do that right there. And I will try to put the rotation somewhere around here. And again, line up there. Okay, so now that we've got our bones set up, I'm going to go ahead and start drawing the arm. So we select left arm, and I'm going to select the point tool, and I've got auto fill, auto stroke set up. I don't want those set up here because I'm going to actually have a dividing line, and you'll see about that in a second. It has to do with the ability to create lines and this depth kind of line as the arm comes in front, like you can see it over here where the line crosses over that crossing. So I'm going to turn off the auto stroke and auto fill, leave auto weld on, and I'm going to turn off the sharp corners. And so now I'm going to draw the arm, and the only things that I want to make sure of is I want to have points right about here at the elbow, one on either side. And then I want to have 3 points at this end because I am using a rounded kind of shoulder here. If you're not using a rounded shoulder, you can do whatever you want. And then again, I'm going to do a rounded kind of area here for the hand. But other than that, I can follow however I want. So I'm going to start here, point 1, 2, 3. And now I'm just going to kind of follow the reference drawing here. And I've put a point, similar to there, so close to there, so that's good enough. Come out here a little bit, and then 1, 2, 3 for that. And I'm going to put a point here, put a point there, and maybe here, and then come up together. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the Bezier handles there so I just kind of see those points. I'm going to zoom in, and now I'm going to construct a line between these here. The reason that I do that is because when I bend this arm, we want, when you bend it past like 90 degrees and these things start overlapping, you'll see a gap if you don't put this line in there. So I'm going to do this, and I also want, again, as I was talking about this line that kind of overlaps, I want this overlapping to occur. And I want it to overlap from this side if I bend the arm that way, and I want it to overlap from the other side if I bend the arm the other way. And so I'm actually going to put a point in the center. So I'm going to start here, put a point, and join the point there. Okay. So now, and actually I could have done that after I did the arm shape, but that's a technique improvement there. So in this one here, as we start here, I'm going to take the Bezier handle, and I'm going to press Alt, and that will give me a sharper curve here. And I can just change the shape and move that point. So if you don't know how to do that, you should look at some other videos. I'm not going to get into the detail too much about these Bezier handles, but you can move them and change them quite a bit. The one thing that I will say at this point in time, right now, is for a rounded type of end, what we want to do is select these 2 points that are not quite at the end, and we want to set their curvature to 0. So I'm just going to select the curvature tool and click on this angle, this peak, and that set the curvature to 0. But for the other one, what I will do is I want to draw these handles out perpendicular to the bone and go all the way out to the edge here. And these points should wind up being perpendicular to the bone off out to the edge. And that will give us a curvature that really is circular. And you can see and play around with that so that it goes through the center. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, to get it, that line to kind of go through the center here. And so that it doesn't have to be totally perfect, especially since you're not really matching anything. If you need to know more about this, you can look at the rounded joint kind of example here. But there you go. So that's good enough for that reference circle. We can turn that off now. Now we want to go ahead and give shape to this a little bit. So I'm just going to tweak the Bezier handles a little bit, draw this one in some, just to get it to match my reference drawing a little bit better. Okay. We'll do a circle over here at the end. We don't need to worry about it right now, but we'll do that when we finish up the hand. But that's good enough for that smart curve. And now let's go ahead and give a shape to this. So I'm going to do this shape selection tool. And what we want to do is we want to create one shape for the upper arm and another shape for the other arm. So I'm first going to start and select this whole area here. Need to make sure that we have the style. Let's go to advanced style and make sure we've got it set up to skin or whatever color it is that you want to use. Now in this particular case, because of this line here where I want to actually control this crossover, this overlap, I'm not going to show the stroke here. I am only going to show the fill and create that shape. And I'm going to do the same thing for this other one here, and I'm going to create the shape. And there we go, we've got the arm. And now as I move it around, once I bind things, it will bend appropriately. In fact, let's go ahead and do the binding at this point in time. So I'm going to bind. You got to think about which points that you want connected to move with this bone and which points you want to move with this bone. So I'm going to take everything from this, including these points. I want these points right here to move with that bone. And in Smart Bones, it's very important that you get your binding set up. You know how the binding's set up, because if you change your binding, that will affect the Smart Bones. And so that's one of the drawbacks of Smart Bones. If I add points or I change the binding, it can affect the whole Smart Bone action. All right, so now I'm going to go in and I'm going to click on this bone, and I'm going to use point selection, or the bind points, and I'm going to select all of these points, and I'm going to bind them to that point, to that bone. And so I click on bind points. Now I'm going to go to this other bone and do the bind points selector, and I'm going to take all these other points and bind them to that bone. And there we go. And you can see very easily which points are bound to which bone by just have the bone selection tool, select bone tool, and when I click on the bone, you can see which points are bound to it. Alright, so now that they're bound, you can see there's this the manipulation tool. I can go in here, and I actually don't need bone strengths, but you can see that the bone is does move the points. Now you can see this is where the Smart Bones need to be fixed, but this is where that line, that middle line, you'll see now there's not a gap here, and so that's what that middle line does for us. And you can see we'll need to tweak this with the Smart Bone actions. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the bone strength because I really don't want that bone strength there, and I don't need it for the hand. Okay, the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the strokes in. So in this particular case, again, I want stroke for basically everything except for that point. That's going to be a stroke here, and I can probably include the other ones as well, but it's just as easy to just go ahead and do it in 2 steps. I can probably include everything except for that point, and it would probably work. But I'm going to go ahead and do the stroke right there. I'm going to create another one so we can do that stroke. And now what I want to do is I want to have this stroke here and do that as its own separate stroke. The next thing that I want to do, let me zoom in here, and I'm going to come into this center point here, control click just to make sure I select only that one, and I'm going to change its thickness. And so here we have this come down to a center to nothing, and so that helps me with that overlap kind of thing, and make it come down to exactly to nothing. But you know, I could have a thickness that I wanted up to end with. It's up to you, however you want to do that. That's an artistic kind of thing that you choose. But I just wanted to show you that you can do that. All right. The next thing that I want to do as I set this particular one up is I actually notice in this arm position, I probably do want some overlap a little bit here, but I don't want it there. And the way that I deal with that is this tool right here. And that's the hide edge tool. And when I drag left and right, you'll see, oops, I used the wrong one. Sorry about that. I meant to have this tool here, stroke exposure. That's what I meant to do. When I click and drag left and right, let's see where it should. There we go. It should do it. There you go. So I have to select the whole line, and then I drag. It will affect the stroke exposure. So here I want it to be about right there. Now, if I want to see it coming from the other end, I press Alt and drag left and right, and you can see it affects the other end. So Alt affects one end, and without Alt affects the other end. So I'm going to set it so here we have this stroke exposure here, and that's how you can get it the overlap to show on different sides depending upon the bone position. We'll show you that as we do the smart bones. Okay, so finally, the last thing that I want to do is I want to take that reference circle and I want to move it over here to this wrist and zoom in. Okay, and I'm going to press Alt and zoom in to about what the wrist size that I want. And so I'm going to move the center to right there and change the size to whatever I think is good. And now the next thing that I want to do with that left arm is I'm going to align this. Now in this particular case I want this to be pretty well matched. And so what I'm going to do here is another technique here is I'm going to select the rotation tool and I'm going to rotate the whole workspace so that this bone here is vertical, straight up and down. And so I zoom out a little bit till it looks fairly straight up and down here, and then I'm going to zoom in, and that just makes things a little bit easier to set up. It's not critical. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to do the things that we had talked about. Let's make sure that this is curvature of 0, so those need to be a curvature of 0, and then I'm going to press Control and click on those points so I can move one point at a time, and I'm going to move it up again so it's perpendicular and to the side, matching up with that circle there. And then I set the Bezier curves. Now, because I have a bit of an asymmetrical arm and the lines are coming in from different angles, it's not exactly the same as a typical straight rounded circle. So all I need to, so the point, the Bezier handles are a little bit off, and the point here is not exactly perpendicular there, but it's tangent. This line is coming in tangent, and we just tweak it so that it matches that curve. And as I turn off the reference circle, we can see, okay, well maybe this needs to come out a little bit there. Okay, and we can tweak it on and off to see what needs to be tweaked. Okay, maybe this needs to come out a little bit until you feel good. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're never going to be zoomed in that much when you look at the animation, but that's how you can do that. I'm going to now turn off the left arm, hide the left arm a little bit, and I'm going to turn on the left hand, and we can see that that means that this hand would not match that wrist very well. So we have to tweak that. And so we can either increase the wrist size, or we can do the hand and change the hand some. So I'm going to go ahead and move the hand a little bit up here. And since this is a switch layer, and we decide how, I could put it here and then have the hand come in here. It's totally up to me on how I want to fix these things, but each particular part of the switch layer I have to fix individually. And so I'm going to have this one, and for this relaxed one, I'm just going to turn off the control points here, the Bezier handles, and I'm going to move things just so that they match into that circle, so they look the way that I want them to look. And again, that's an artistic choice, but the point is you can set it up however you want. And once you've done that, and we'll just use that one as the example, and I'm going to turn, let's close the left hand and turn the left arm on. And now, let me go ahead and go to the workspace and reset the view and zoom in a little bit here. And now we can see that as I manipulate that hand, I haven't bound it, so I need to bind the hand first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the position of the bone, and don't have to, but that seems more natural. So I'm going to go in here, and for that hand, I'm going to bind it to that bone. So I do a layer binding to this bone. And so now, as I go in and I manipulate that hand, we see that the hand matches, and we can see the arm and the hand is moving properly. Now, of course, we need to fix the joint there, but you see that the hand is, that's a nice motion there. So next we want to do the smart bone. So up until now, we've basically just been constructing the arm. Now we're going to get into the smart bone construction. Okay, so to do the smart bone construction, the first thing that I would suggest is make sure you've got your bones named nicely. So I'm going to call this left upper arm, and I'm going to call this left lower arm, and I'm going to call this left hand. Now, you may have seen when I first started, I probably had bones, or maybe in other constructions you may have seen bone colors. So you can set the colors for the bones, and I typically take things on the left side and match them to one color, and the right side another color. It just makes it easier to find them. I would suggest don't use yellow for the background. It's kind of hard if you use this darker thing with white letters. So just select whatever colors you want, but I'm not going to do that right here. But once the bones are named appropriately, then you can now do the smart bone connection. And so when I manipulate the upper arm, I am really not going to do anything with smart bones. So there's no need to do anything with the smart bones for the upper arm. There's a little bit of kind of indentation here, maybe, so I might want to change that or whatever. But that's, you can see here as I move that arm, it seems fairly natural, whereas if this were more pointed, it would kind of look a little bit strange. But you could fix that with smart bones. That's up to you. But the main point we're going to deal with is the smart bone as it affects this elbow, because as I go over here, oh, that's totally horrible, and as I come here, it just doesn't look good, and so that's what we're going to deal with here. Okay, so now I'm going to switch and show the action section, and I'll just go ahead and click on smart bones, and you can see there's no smart bone actions created yet. So the first thing that we're going to do is select the bone. And now we're going to create a new action, a new smart bone action. So I come on here and I click and say new action. And by default, it will say it will be named exactly the same as the existing arm if I don't have ones already created. So I'm going to click on OK because that's exactly what I want to do. Let me go ahead and make sure that we're showing the timeline. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to set the angle for the arm. Now, as a hint, it is possible to create a smart bone that just with one action you do both directions. I used to do that a lot, but it turns out that can really result in problems, and it's just much easier to go ahead and do both actions here, especially since now in the latest versions of Moho you can actually look at the different actions by looking at morphs or regular or smart bones. It just makes it very easy. So again, I'm going to open up the left lower arm. Notice that we were on the bone layer. It's very important that you create that action starting at the bone layer. Okay, so now I've got this left lower arm first action, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the angle. But first, I have to move the timeline scrubber to wherever I want. I'm going to go ahead and set it to 72. You can put it wherever you want. The further you put it out, the more actions that you can put in, but 72 is good. And I'm going to change the angle. So I'm going to allow them to move the hand up about that much. I could go further, but really that's a good place to do. And you can see it kind of gets a little bit messed up and everything as we go on. All right, so now all we need to do is go to that layer and adjust things. So the first thing that I'm going to do is click on the left arm, and now that takes me into the action for the left arm. I want to move the points is the main thing that I'm going to be doing, and right now I want to make sure that the Bezier handles are off. That's just because I want to get the points in the pretty good place to start with because it looks so messed up over here. But then I am going to use Bezier Bezier handles to fix things. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to just zoom in so I get a good sense of things. And this point here is going to be the main point of this problem because we had it bound to this upper bone. And the reason is because when I switch the arm to the other way, we don't want it moving. But it kind of causes a problem for this one because you almost want it bound to this bone. But anyway, the smart bone, we just drag that point up here, and then we drag the other point in the other direction, okay, to get us what we think is a pretty close idea of we want, and then the overlap we can move. Then also we want the elbow. The elbow should really be kind of opposite of this bone here, okay, and so we just tweak things the way that we like it, the way we think that drawing should be. Now there's a little bit of discontinuity here, and that's where once I've got the general idea of what that arm I want it to look like in this position at 72, keyframe 72, now I can turn on the Bezier handles, and let me go ahead and control click, and I can see the different handles here, and I control click on the point, and now I'm going to drag this out a little bit here so that it looks just a little bit nicer. And there we go. So as we do smart bones, you just can think about it as if I'm drawing the character in that particular position. Now I scrub the handle, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the Bezier handles again just to make it a little bit easier to see things. And as I scrub the handle, I see, is there any particular place that I really want it to be different? Well, as it comes up here, I'm not a big fan of it looking kind of bent here. There's kind of a sharp angle there. So I'm going to pick maybe here. I don't know, someplace here, because that one looks pretty sharp here. And I'm going to tweak that point a little bit. And let's maybe turn on the Bezier handles and zoom in. And I'm going to move this down a little bit. Maybe tweak that handle a little bit there. Pull this handle up, like that. Whatever it is that I think that I look like. And there we go. So we just continue tweaking. To what we think looks nice. Okay? And you can just tweak forever. And so to me, that's a pretty good arm movement for that direction. So we can just double click on mainline, okay, and that takes us back to the main area. So now I want to make sure that I've got the bone layer selected again. because now we're going to create a new action. So we create a new action, and notice it calls it left arm 2, and that is the default way that you want it. That's the naming you want, the convention, so that they'll both one action will be for one direction and one action will be for another direction, and you just say OK. And again, we're going to do the same thing that we did before. Move the scrubber out to someplace. It doesn't have to be 72, but I'm going to do that same thing for 72, and I'm going to change the angle of this bone over to here. And everything will look quite a bit worse than it did in the other direction. Okay, but that's what we're going to fix now. And that's the whole point of the smart bones. So I'm going to go in here to the left arm. I'm going to select the point transform tool, and I'm making sure that the Bezier handles are off to start with. And I'm going to do the same kind of thing that I did before. And just try to look at what it should look like. Now, in particular, I want to kind of ignore a little bit about these shapes because that's what we're going to take care of with the Bezier handles. But I get them into the general location that they should be, internal in the Bezier handles. And now we see, okay, I want to drag these things down a little bit. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here. This Bezier handle like this maybe. And here I'm going to press Alt to get this sharper Bezier handle for things. Okay, and maybe this arm is a little bit too puffy out there. Maybe I want the tricep to show up a little bit more. Could possibly move these points over a little bit more. Zoom in to fix it a little bit. Okay, and so you'll notice that at the joint like this, we've got one line, 3 lines coming out of this point, and so we've got handles for each of these things. Okay, and in this point here, we want the curvature to be like we expect it to be. We're focusing mainly on this side, and so now we need to deal with the stroke exposure. And so here we're going to go to the stroke exposure, and we're going to do that Alt click and drag. And oops, sorry, we need to make sure that we select that line, and we want it set up the way we expect. There we go. And so we want it to end up maybe not that far, because maybe, well, actually maybe we want to move the point. So maybe something like that. Okay, and so that's what it would look like. Now, really, she might have her arm out the other way, so you could rotate the canvas and everything, but now I'm going to scrub the handle, and again, I'm looking for what these things should look like. Here, that doesn't look like what I think it ought to look like, so I'm going to drag points, move the Bezier handles the way I think it should be, the lines as well, and also do the stroke exposure as well. So in this particular case, maybe this point should be down here, maybe that one should be a little bit more that way. Stroke exposure. And using the Bezier handles again to fix things. And I just scrub to see what looks right. And the thing, probably the one area that you want to check the most is when I'm pretty straight, what should that arm look like? And so that's an area to watch. and then also the stroke exposure as well. So this one you can see is coming from the wrong direction, so the stroke exposure should probably be different there. So let's see. Maybe there. And then on this side, just to the other side of it, what we want to do is probably have it at this point right before. Probably want it just to have disappeared from there, so that as we're coming this way, it disappears that way, and then in the very next frame it starts to appear from the other end. And that seems to go too far here, so that one seems to be a little bit too far, and so there we go. And again, that seems a little bit too far. Okay. And you can affect the thickness and however you want to do. But that's basically the essence of the SmartBone. So let me go ahead and do the main line here and go to the Kim Possible. I'll go ahead and turn off the reference layer. And as I move the arm out here and bend it over, of course we would have a different hand position, but you can see basically what the arm looks like. And so that's how you can use SmartBones to create and construct an arm that is quite a bit more dynamic and just can match whatever you want as you do your drawing. If you want a simpler technique, and so as you make changes, as you move these to other characters, you will have to be comfortable with looking at SmartBones and understanding, what all these little keyframes are about and how they're different between the different reference frames and stuff like that. But if you're comfortable with that, the SmartBone approach is just very, very powerful for creating dynamic looking behavior in the animation. So I hope you enjoyed that. Check out the rounded joint tutorial if you want a simpler approach to things that works with simplified characters, and I hope that was helpful. Enjoy animating with Momo.